Chapter 2. Types of Fear. There is a threefold fear in humanity: natural fear, sinful fear, and religious fear. Natural fear. Everyone experiences natural fear. It is a trouble or agitation of mind. It arises when we perceive approaching evil or impending danger. It is not always sinful, but it is always the fruit and consequence of sin. Ever since sin entered human nature, it has been impossible to shake off this fear. As soon as Adam transgressed, he feared, hiding himself amongst the trees of the garden, Genesis 3, verse 8. When he transgressed the covenant, he immediately feared the execution of the curse. First he eats, then he hides. He transmitted this afflictive passion to all of his children. It pleased our Lord Jesus Christ to subject himself to natural fear. In the days of his flesh, he was afraid, even sore amazed, Mark 14, verse 33. Although his human nature was absolutely free from sin, he came in the likeness of sinful flesh, Romans 8, verse 3. This fear creates great trouble and agitation in the mind. Fear has torment, 1 John 4, verse 18. The agitation of the mind is proportionate to the fear, which in turn is proportionate to the perceived danger. When fear is exceedingly great, reason is displaced and unable to guide us. We become like sailors in a storm, whom the psalmist describes as at their wits' end, Psalm 107, verse 27. This is the meaning of Deuteronomy 28, verse 25. The Lord shall cause you to be smitten before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. In other words, their fear and distraction are so great that they attempt to flee one way, then another, striving every way, but liking none. Their fear impedes the aid of reason to such an extent that their counsels are always uncertain and at a loss. A person's usual cry in this condition is this: I don't know what to do. I don't know which way to turn. Evil is the object of fear. The greater the evil, the stronger the fear. For this reason, the terrors of an awakened conscience are the greatest terrors. In this case, people deal with a great and terrible God. They are scared with apprehensions of his infinite and eternal wrath. No evil is greater than that. Christ's conflict with it was so great that it made him sweat, as it were, great drops of blood. Death is the greatest of all temporal evils. Therefore, Job calls it the king of terrors, Job 18, verse 14. Jacques Auguste de Tous, a French historian, relates 2 strange instances of the fear of death. The first is of a captain who was so terrified with the fear of death that a bloody sweat poured out from every part of his body. The second is of a young man whom Pope Sixtus V condemned to death for a trivial matter. He was so terrified at the prospect of death that he shed bloody tears. These are strange and terrible effects of fear, yet vastly short of what Christ suffered. He grappled with a far greater evil than the terrors of death, namely the pouring out of God's wrath fully and immediately upon him. Evil is the principal object of hatred. However, when evil is imminent, it also provokes fear. The saints in glory are perfectly free from fear because they are beyond the reach of all danger. We, on the other hand, are in the midst of all kinds of evil. We do not fear them until we see them approaching and are uncertain how to avoid them. To hear of fire, plague, or sword in a foreign country does not frighten us because evil is so remote. It is so far away that we are in no danger. However, when it is in our town, or even worse, in our home, we tremble. Evil does not hurt us through our mere apprehension of it, but our experience of it. It is worth observing that all carnal security is maintained by putting evil at a great distance from us. It is said of secure sensualists, they put far away the evil day, Amos 6, verse 3. This does not mean that they put the evil day further away from them in reality, but only in their imagination. They shut their eyes and refuse to see it, lest it should interrupt their happiness. This is a reason why death does not frighten the living. It is apprehended as remote, in an undetermined distance. If the precise time of death were known, especially if that time were near, it would terrify them. This fear is the affliction of nature. We all groan under its effects. It is in all creatures to some degree, but most prevalent in people. It makes them their own tormentors. When it prevails in a high degree upon us, it is the greatest of torments. Indeed, not all constitutions and temperaments experience the same degree of fear. Some people are naturally bold and courageous. They are like the lion in bravery and fortitude. Some people are exceedingly cowardly and faint-hearted. They are like the deer or rabbit. One little dog will make 100 of them flee. Martin Luther was a man of great courage and presence of mind in the midst of danger. Philip Melanchthon, on the other hand, was very fearful and subject to despondency. The difference between them is expressed in one of Luther's letters to Melanchthon, quote, "I am a secure spectator of things. I do not fear anything, those fierce and threatening papists say. I dislike those anxious cares, which as you ride almost consume you." End quote. There might be as much grace in one as in the other, but Melanchthon's grace did not have the advantage of Luther's bold and courageous temperament of body and mind. Sinful fear. There is a fear that is formally and intrinsically sinful. It is not only our unhappiness, but our fault. It is not only our affliction and burden, but our great evil and provocation. Such is a fear cautioned against in our text when it is called their fear. Isaiah 8, verse 12. When danger threatened, carnal and unbelieving people experience this fear. Its sinfulness lies in 5 things. First, its cause. Sinful fear arises from unbelief, an unworthy distrust of God. This occurs when we fail to rely upon the security of God's promise. In other words, when we refuse to trust in God's protection. This is the case with Israel. For thus saith the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest shall you be saved. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength, and you would not. But you said, No, for we will flee upon horses. Therefore shall you flee. And we will ride upon the swift. Therefore shall they that pursue you be swift. 1,000 shall flee at the rebuke of one, Isaiah 30, verses 15 to 17. The situation here is as follows. Sennacherib, along with a mighty army, is ready to invade Israel. This frightens the people. In their distress, God assures them, through his prophet, that in returning and rest they will be saved, and in quietness and confidence they will be strengthened. This means that they must not involve themselves with counsels and schemes designed to secure them under the wings of Egypt or some other protector. On the contrary, they must rest upon God's power with a calm quiet and a composed state of mind. They must take his promises for their security. This will be their salvation and strength, more effective to their preservation than armies, garrisons, or any other defense in the world. In a word, one act of faith will do them more good than Pharaoh and all of his forces. But they refuse to trust God. They decide that a good horse will do them more service than a good promise. They think Egypt offers them better security than heaven. This is a fruit of gross infidelity. Wicked people forsake God and cleave to the creature in times of trouble. Some of this same distrust is found in the best people. It was in the disciples. Christ asked them, Why are you fearful, O you of little faith? Matthew 8, verse 26. A storm arises at sea. Danger begins to threaten them. Suddenly their fear is more boisterous than the wind. It has more need of calming than the sea. It arises from their unbelief. The less their faith, the greater their fear. If we were to rely upon God's promise so far as he enables us to believe, we would reckon ourselves to be very secure. Matthias Flacius Illyricus, a Lutheran reformer, relates a remarkable account of Andreas Proles, an aged and godly divine who lived a little before Luther. He taught many points of doctrine soundly, according to the light available to him at the time. Having been called to a synod at Milan, he opposed the Pope's proposal to institute a new church holiday as an unnecessary burden. As a result of his opposition, his life was in danger. After escaping, he bought weapons to protect himself. However, one day as he was writing, he remembered that the cause belonged to God. It was not to be maintained with sword and bow. What could a decrepit old man do with weapons anyway? Soon after, he threw them away and committed his journey to God. He relied upon God's promises more than sword or bow. He returned home safely and years later died quietly in his bed. Sinful fear. Its excess. The sinfulness of fear lies in its excess and immoderacy when we fear more than we ought. We might say if our fear is a philosopher says of water, it is hard to keep it within bounds. Every bush is a bear. Every petty trouble frightens us. Our fear exceeds the value and merit of its cause. It is a great sin to love or fear any creature above its worth, as if it were master of all our temporal and eternal comforts. When the people of Israel hear their enemies' alliance against them, their hearts are moved, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind, Isaiah 7 verse 2. It is a sad sight to see people shaking and quivering like trees on a windy day. Yet that is what the house of David does, partly because of their remembrance of past calamities, but especially because of their unbelief in God's protecting care in their present and future dangers. This is too often the fault of good people in creature fear, creature love. They transgress the due bounds of moderation. It is noted of Jacob that he was a man of much faith. He had the sweetest encouragement to strengthen it both from former experiences and from God's gracious promises. Yet, when Esau draws near, he is greatly afraid and distressed. Genesis 32 verse 7. Moments earlier, God had graciously appeared to him and sent a royal guard of angels to attend him. Genesis 32 verses 1 and 2. Despite this encouraging vision, he is greatly afraid and distressed as soon as Esau approaches. Sinful fear. Its inordinacy. The sinfulness of our fear lies in its excessiveness. To fear something more than we ought is bad enough, but to magnify its power above that of a creature is sinful. When we exalt a creature's power by fearing it, we give it ascendancy over us. In effect, we act as if it had arbitrary and absolute dominion over us and our comforts, to do with them whatever it pleases. In so doing, we elevate the creature beyond its class and rank, to the place of God. This is a very sinful and evil fear. To trust in any creature as if it had God's power to help us, or to fear any creature as if it had God's power to hurt us, is exceedingly sinful. It provokes God. He condemns such inordinate trust in our text. The people of Israel want to turn to Egypt for help. They trust in their horses and horsemen because they are strong. In their opinion, Egypt is able to secure them against all that God declares through the prophet, to turn them from their sinful and inordinate dependence upon the creature. He warns them. Now the Egyptians are men and not God, and their horses flesh and not spirit. When the Lord shall stretch out his hand, both he that helps shall fall, and he that is hoping shall fall down, and they all shall fail together. Isaiah 31 verse 3. It is a sinful and dangerous mistake to give to a creature that trust and dependence that belongs to God alone. To look upon people as if they were gods, and horses as if they were spirits, is sinful. All creatures, even the strongest, are like the vine or ivy. If they clasp the pole, wall, or oak, they find support. But if they entangle themselves with one another, like the Israelites with the Egyptians, they all fall down. We are inclined to a sinful trust and dependence upon each other, and to an inordinate fear and dread of each other. We act as if the creature were a god rather than a man, a spirit rather than flesh. So our fear magnifies and exalts the creature, putting it as it were in God's room and place. God rebukes his sin in his own people. I, even I, am he that comforts you. Who are you, that you should be afraid of man that shall die, and of the Son of Man which shall be made as grass? and forget the Lord your Maker, Isaiah 51, verses 12 and 13. It is evident that fear exalts people and belittles God. It thinks upon a person's harmful power so much that it forgets God's saving power. In this way, a mortal worm which perishes as a grass eclipses the glory of the great God who stretched forth the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. Christ cautions his disciples against this evil. And do not fear them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell, Matthew 10, verse 28. Be careful not to fear any man, as if the power of making or marring you were in his hands, as if it were his will and pleasure to save or ruin you. Do not fear those who can only touch your body, as if they could damn your soul. Do not attribute to any creature God's sovereign and incommunicable power. Sinful fear, its influence. The sinfulness of fear consists in the distracting influence it has upon the heart, whereby it unfits us for the discharge of our spiritual duties. At times fear puts people into such a frenzy, and their thoughts into such disorder, that they receive little support or relief from their graces, or from their reason. Under extraordinary fear, both grace and reason, like the wheels of a watch, wound above its due height, stand still and have no motion at all. It is rare to find a man of such constancy of heart and mind. In a day of fear, it's Jehoshaphat. Then there came some that told Jehoshaphat, saying, There comes a great multitude against you from beyond the sea on this side Syria. And behold, they be in Hazazon Tamar, which is in En-gedi. And Jehoshaphat feared and set himself to seek the Lord. 2 Chronicles 20, verses 2-3. He set himself, meaning he fixed and composed his heart for prayer in a time of great fright and terrible alarm. It is rare to find such constancy and evenness of mind. Most people are like those whom the prophet describes. When the enemy besieges Jerusalem, the people's joy turns to panic. Isaiah 22, verses 2 and 3. The city becomes tumultuous. Some people run to the tops of their houses, either to hide or mourn. The mere apprehension of misery kills many before the enemy's sword touches any. None of them run into their closets to seek God. The city is full of stirs, but not of prayers. Fear makes them cry to the mountains rather than to God. Isaiah 22, verse 5. The best people find it difficult to keep their thoughts from wandering, and their minds from distraction in the greatest calm. It is 1,000 times more difficult in the tumult of fear. Sinful fear. Its power. The sinfulness of fear consists in its power to dispose and incline people to use sinful means to escape danger. This casts them into the hands of temptation. The fear of man brings a snare. Proverbs 29, verse 25. Satan spreads the net, and fear drives people right into it. Fear led Abraham, a great believer, into the snare of deception. This resulted in a great discredit of religion, for it was a strange sight to see Abimelech, a heathen, rebuking Abraham. Genesis 20, verse 9. God rebukes his people for this same evil. And of whom have you been afraid or feared, that you have lied and have not remembered me? Isaiah 57, verse 11. Fear leads to a double lie, one in words and one in deeds. Hypocrisy is a lie in deeds, a practical lie. The history of the church abounds with sad examples of deception through fear. It is Satan's great weapon to make his temptations victorious over men. Religious fear. There is a holy and laudable fear, which is our treasure, not our torment. It is the chief ornament of the soul, its beauty and perfection, not its unhappiness or sin. Natural fear is a pure and simple passion of the soul. Sinful fear is a disordered and corrupt passion of the soul. But the awful filial fear of God is a natural passion sanctified, changed and baptized into the name and nature of a spiritual grace. This fear is also mentioned in our text. It is prescribed as an antidote against sinful fear. It devours carnal fear, as Moses' serpent devoured those of the enchanters. Exodus 7, verse 12. Living night and day in the fear of man is one of the worst judgments. Deuteronomy 28, 65-67. but living all the day long in the fear of God is one of the sweetest mercies, Proverbs 23, verse 17. The fear of man shortens our days, but the fear of God prolongs them, Proverbs 10, verse 27. The fear of man is a fountain of mischief and misery, but the fear of God is a fountain of life, Proverbs 14, verse 27. The fear of man causes people to run to evil, Proverbs 29, verse 25. But the fear of God causes them to depart from evil, Proverbs 16, verse 6. This fear is a gracious habit or principle which God plants in the soul, whereby it is kept under a holy awe of the eye of God. As a result, it is inclined to do what pleases God and avoid what he forbids and hates. There are 4 parts of this definition. 1. God plants his fear in the soul as a fixed and permanent habit. It is not therefore a natural product of our heart, but a supernatural infusion and implantation. I will put my fear in their hearts, Jeremiah 32, verse 40. To fear man is natural. To fear God is wholly supernatural. Number 2, this fear puts the soul under the awe of God's eye. My heart stands in awe of your word, Psalm 119, verse 161. It is a reproach of people's servants to be eye servants, but it is the praise and honor of God's servants to be so. Number 3, this fear inclines us to do what pleases God. Hence, fearing God and working righteousness are related, Acts 10, verse 35. If we fear God, we dare not ignore what he commands. If his fear is exalted in our hearts, it will enable us to obey him in duties accompanied with deep self-denial. Now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Genesis 22, verse 12. Number 4, this fear engages and to some degree enables the soul to shun and avoid whatever displeases God. Job refused to touch what God had forbidden. Therefore God honored him with this excellent description. He was one that feared God and eschewed evil. Job 1, verse 1. Thus you have the types of fear.